Hello, welcome to another Seth and Gentry show. I'm Seth Emerson with the Macon Telegraph, and this is
Gentry Estes, Dogs 24/7.
And we'll start out right away with the fact that I'm wearing a sweater vest. I think it was in the 90s, the mid to late 90s, that the sweater vest was really big.
Well, you know, the basketball team plays Youngstown State tonight.
Yeah.
So you got the Jim Tressel factor.
Wow, that was a stretch. That was 2 degrees from sweater vest to basketball.
He made it famous, though.
That's
a
Jim
Tressel move.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking of Jim Tressel. You were relating it to football. I was just going to talk about Chandler Bing. That's the Friends character, by the way. All right, if we haven't lost all of you yet, we're going to talk some football. I just want to say I have the courage to wear a sweater vest, and that means I have the courage to say bad things about the Georgia football team. But there's nothing bad to say at this moment. This, to me, and I've written this column, Gentry, for tomorrow's paper. It'll appear. This Georgia football team, for all the problems it had earlier, and for as bad as that game in South Carolina was, they are peaking as we get to the end of the season. They're playing their best ball. Now, I know Auburn stinks, but they turned it on against Ole Miss. You know, LSU had some problems with Auburn. Auburn had a couple games where Georgia did what they were supposed to do. Do you disagree with my premise that Georgia is playing its best football of the season, that it's peaking at the right time and showing that there's some hope here?
I think so, because the defense is playing better, but I just hesitate to put a whole lot into that game Saturday. I mean, Georgia did what they needed to do in that they were focused, they were aggressive, they played well, they took care of business, they did what they did not do at Kentucky.
Yeah.
And that really is, you know, what happened Saturday is what that Kentucky game should have looked like, and it didn't. But Auburn's pretty bad.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I took away from that game.
There's no doubt, and everybody's looking ahead to Alabama in the SEC championship game. And we're going to go ahead and assume it's Alabama because Auburn winning at Alabama would be pretty much the biggest upset in SEC history at this point. Until Georgia does it on that stage, you don't know for sure. And how they do against Georgia Southern and Georgia Tech isn't an accurate gauge, especially against Georgia Tech's defense, which is bad, giving up 50 points to North Carolina.
You know, those two home games it's going to be a long couple of weeks just because I think everybody's going to want to talk about Alabama. That's what the players are going to hear about. That's what everything, the buzz is going to be. And they do have two opponents that could be tricky. I think Georgia Southern could be very tricky for this. I mean, they have a kind of offense that is going to give teams trouble. They gave Alabama trouble last year. And I think that Georgia's going to have to play very focused against each of these next two teams. Now, they have a good track record of doing that against Georgia Tech, and I think they will this time too.
Do you think it's a good thing to play 2 triple option teams in a row? And then, I mean, it's good within the context of a season, but good to then play an Alabama after that and change. You do one thing for 2 weeks, and then you have to switch back.
I think doing that will help them against Georgia Tech, obviously, because they're going to see it this week, so it won't be – you don't have to cram in all this on Thanksgiving week before you play Georgia Tech. But you're risking injuries with this. And, you know, they had it happen with D'Angelo Tyson last year on a cut block on the very first play of the game, and I think that there's a lot of cut blocks out there waiting to get some of these D-linemen linebackers, and they're going to have to stay healthy. They're going to need everybody against Alabama.
Yeah, the injuries started to accumulate for this team between Avery Jones, who there are now conflicting things on whether he can play in the bowl if they get that far, but he's out. Michael Bennett, Marlon Brown out. You've got to have a full deck going into Alabama, and for whatever happens after that. But Mark Richt says that they're not going to rest anybody. Everybody's going to play, and for the most part, I mean, I anticipate that. You're not going to see Aaron Murray get benched for the third quarter, but you may see some of that. At Auburn, for instance, the offense was subbing guys in at the end of the third quarter and for all of the fourth quarter, whereas the defense kept everybody in.
Yeah, the defense has done that all year. I mean, really, to a baffling standpoint to me, I don't understand why you don't let some of the younger guys get a few snaps in a game like that, but that's how Todd Grantham wants to do it.
Apparently getting the shutout was more important than risking injury to Jarvis Jones and guys like that.
And they got it.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, if that's your goal,
they would have been second guessed big time if someone had gotten hurt.
Well, Avery Jones got hurt against Vanderbilt in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
If you forget that, his ankle. Now the injury that knocked him out for the year was against Kentucky, but he first hurt that ankle against Vanderbilt. So I mean, you can have that happen. That's how he chooses to do it, and I think his explanation would probably be that Auburn still had a lot of their starters in offensively at the time. And
his explanation to me actually was, What was the score of that Buffalo Bills Houston Oilers game where the Bills had that comeback? It was 31-0, and for one thing, I corrected him. I said, no, that was 35-3. 31-0 was Maryland's epic comeback against Miami in 1983.
Let me put it this way:
Yeah.
Georgia could have played with 10 men in the fourth quarter,
Yeah.
and Auburn wouldn't have come back. And
That
won
was a
that
good point. They could have skipped right past the second teamers to the third teamers. And here's Blake Sailors at cornerback. And yeah, I mean, if you can't stop that offense with your second teamers, then you probably don't deserve to get a shutout.
You got to play them sometime. I mean, these guys don't have to play next year, but and I think Saturday could be one of those games, but Georgia Southern's a good team.
I see like a 28-16 kind of game.
Maybe a little worse than that, but I think that Southern is the kind of team that could test them. Coming off of maybe not an emotional, hard-fought game, but a game where you win something, and you're it's human nature to kind of take the week off, and we'll see. It's tough for everyone because now everyone wants to talk about Alabama. That's the big game, and that's what everyone's going to kind of be thinking about. And if you're Georgia, you have to go play two teams that you need to be ready for.
Georgia Southern's 8-2. Do I have that right?
8-2.
8-2.
A good team. They've had a good season. They usually do down there. It's a good program.
I would venture to guess, and you probably agree with me. If you have to sit right here, you'd say the point spread, Georgia Tech, they're going to beat Georgia Tech, assuming they win these next two. Georgia's going to beat Georgia Tech by more than they beat Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern will be closer. That's my guess.
No.
Just because of the matchup. And what you said earlier, you're going up against triple option for a second straight week against Georgia Tech.
I mean, that's an advantage, it is. But no, I think where these two games are really important for Georgia, and I think that they do have something to play for in the fact that they're fifth in the BCS right now. Mm-hmm. Were you surprised Alabama was still ahead of them?
No, but it's like Reese Davis said on the telecast. It doesn't matter whether Alabama or Georgia, because that'll sort itself out. They're playing each other in 3 weeks, and look. You've got to talk about Georgia in the national championship because it's still a possibility. It's not likely, but it's a possibility. You got to get 2 of those 3 to lose: Notre Dame, Kansas, and Oregon. And there are games each of them could lose. Notre Dame, I think, is going at Southern Cal. If you're Georgia fans, you've got to root for Lane Kiffin twice if they play Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. Although the problem for all these other teams, including Georgia and Alabama, is it looks like USC is starting to fall apart.
Well, and Oregon easily has the toughest schedule the rest of the way out of those 3 teams, I think. And I've got an AP voter sitting here in front of us who voted Oregon number 1, I think.
I went Oregon, Kansas State, Notre Dame, and then Alabama, Ohio State, which is not eligible for the BCS, and then Georgia.
Yeah, Alabama ahead of Ohio State.
I had Alabama ahead of Ohio State. Yeah, well, Ohio State's unbeaten. That's the way I look. It was all on my blog. I broke it down. I think, but honestly, there's no right or no wrong on this. Those first 3 unbeaten teams, you could rank them in any order. Mm-hmm. Then those next 3 teams, Ohio State and Alabama, Georgia, you could rank them in any order, and you're not going to be right or wrong. I looked at quality wins. I added up the opponent records for each team. But I am glad as hell that the AP is not involved in the BCS anymore because I wouldn't want that.
I think that was a good move for everyone involved when that happened.
Yeah, I mean, people forget the AP voluntarily pulled out of that. We didn't want to.
And it was at a pretty controversial time for a couple of reporters.
It was a conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm.
We can't. I'm not. I mean, what if the AP were still part of the formula and I'm covering Georgia and I'm voting in the poll and my vote matters as to whether Georgia either goes to the national championship game or gets in a BCS bowl, which is riches and millions.
And
I don't want to be involved. That's a conflict of interest.
And you could say the coaches could have that too, but that's assuming they actually turn in their own ballot, and I'm not so sure very many of them actually do.
Who do you think does Mark Richt's ballot? Have we speculated about that? We probably shouldn't speculate about that on camera, but he seems to know. Whenever he's asked, he seems to know his ballot.
He does. If actually, I would think he would. There's a good chance he does his own versus a lot of other coaches I've been around.
But I'm sure he does it with help, as they all do. Right?
Well, it's tough and this is something that doesn't get brought up. It's tough for media, just like it's tough for coaches, because we're covering one game on Saturday. So, like for instance, we showed up at Jordan-Hare Stadium. I wanted to watch the end of the Tennessee-Missouri game. We were listening to that on the way in. And every single television in the Jordan-Hare press box had the Alabama game on.
Yeah.
And you weren't going to get that turned.
Right.
I don't care who you were asking. So we couldn't watch the end of that game. There's a lot of other games that obviously those 2 teams weren't ranked, but there's a lot of other games we don't get to see because we're at games. Coaches are even worse. I mean, they're not going to
I can assure you, because I know I'm like the coaches and the people voting in the Harris poll, we see results. I follow games on my computer on Saturday while I'm in the press box, and then when my game is over, I look at results, and then Sunday morning I break it down. But I do not see anybody. You don't get a chance to watch film or see anybody else's games, and neither do the coaches, and neither do the Harris Poll voters.
And what happens is you vote off final scores, and that team might not have played as well as that score suggested, or as bad as that score is suggested, and that's just part of the process. But I think this year more than any other, you'd like to have a 14 playoff, wouldn't you?
Oh,
I mean, this is
that would solve it, because look, Alabama's going to get, let's say Alabama or Georgia. 2 of those 3 don't lose. The SEC's won 6 in a row, and you're telling me that basically the SEC knocked itself out because Texas A&M went to Alabama and won, or Georgia laid an egg against South Carolina.
A Kansas State-Oregon national title game is just. I mean, I know we were to an SEC fan.
And I'm not sure Notre Dame does too much either. It does a lot for the 50 and older crowd, but I'm not sure it holds the mystique that.
I think Notre Dame getting in would be fun. I think it'd be
more fun.
I think it would be a bad thing with Kansas State, Oregon, when you have Notre Dame, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, all these programs on the sideline that have played for it, or major programs and a
nightmare scenario. All right, we've got to wrap this up. But
we wandered.
This is obviously Georgia Southern week, but the nightmare scenario is that it's like Kansas State versus Oregon. That game is very badly played. One of those teams wins, and then the SEC champion, whether it be Georgia or Alabama, goes in its bowl in the Sugar Bowl and just waxes somebody. And then to be honest, there's a lot of AP voters like me who are very tempted to give their vote for number 1 to the SEC champ.
You didn't vote Alabama number 1 after last year, did you?
No. But that one could have gone either way also, in my mind. But it did not go my way. All right, we'll be back next week to go over the Georgia Southern game and go over Georgia Tech and break down more of the top 25, I guess. Talk to you later.